I wonder whether there's an Arsenal tax here. I know we always talk about a tax for Manchester United. Whenever Manchester United go in for a player, then the price, the selling club almost add a zero. If I was a selling club and Arsenal were after my striker, it's universally known that they have been after a striker for so long. Why wouldn't you raise the price? Because you can almost feel the desperation for Arsenal to try and bring in a number 9. So it's little wonder that Sporting have said 60, not a chance. If you want this player, you're going to have to go much, much higher, which it looks like they're going to have to do.
It looks like there's going to be more coming through the door at Arsenal as well, guys. Like I said, right at the top, it's turning into quite an exciting looking window. Let me just ask you, before we move on to the other targets, though, Sam, you're great talking about systems and so on, but where will Gyokeres fit as far as Arteta's system is concerned?
Well, I mean, he can only play one position for me. He plays as the number 9, and he's the focal point. So he's got a lot of Arteta traits. I think he will work very hard across the front line, which is a prerequisite for Arteta. He'll drop deep and get the ball and come and get it. Of all the strikers I've seen in the last couple of years, he's probably one of the most adept, I should say, at dropping in really quite deep, taking the ball, shielding it, holding it for 5 seconds, and then getting his team up, or just running. Because remember, for Coventry City, he used to take the ball and just run like 50, 60 yards on his own. Like, he played with power, the stride, the way he runs, the way he knocks the ball ahead of him and just goes. Like, there's a lot of physical quality to Gyokeres here, which I think Arsenal fans are going to really enjoy. And when he hits the ball, I mean, it stays hit. It's one of those. I mean, you can pick apart his goal tallies as much as you want this season. He scored a hell of a lot of goals against a lot of rubbish teams, but he also scored a hat-trick in the Champions League. And when he hits a penalty, and then he breaks the net. So these are qualities that people are looking at in strikers and going, yeah, okay, let's go for it.
Bad news for Havertz then?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the midfield experiment didn't really pan out. Look, you need more than one striker to get through a season. I think that's pretty obvious for a team that Arsenal were going to want to hopefully play 60, 65 games this year. So you need more than one. But this is potentially bad news for Havertz, because in signing a striker, Arsenal, for a lot of money as well, Arsenal are saying, we love what you bring to the table, Kai, but you haven't scored enough goals. That's the simple fact.
They definitely needed a striker. I'm sure Arsenal fans are very, very excited. And if you read some of the other names that are being linked, they can be very exciting. I mean, Dobbs, let's bring you in here. Eberechi Eze. There's been a lot of talk about Tottenham and other clubs this window, but all of a sudden it's emerged that Arsenal may be his destination. How are we seeing this one? Is it progressing quickly, or is there a lot of work to do? What's the latest?
When you say progressing quickly, these kind of deals can go. One agent I spoke to last week, he described it as these kind of deals can go from 5% to 95% in no time at all, because the 5% to 95% can almost be sorted with the agreement with the player. Once personal terms aren't expected to be an issue, you can start negotiating with the club. Is it close? Not necessarily close. Ideally, Arsenal do want to bring him in. He has emerged as a top target for Arsenal now in this transfer window. There's been a few reports that, there have been various negotiations by intermediaries over Eberechi Eze. One thing that should be said here, though, is it can happen quickly or it can be negotiated, because we think that Eberechi Eze has got a release clause in his contract. Now, that release clause is around £60 million plus a further £8 million in performance-related add-ons. So you're looking at a fee in total of around £68 million. He's under contract. So Crystal Palace will want to get the full release clause if he is to go. Whereas there is a situation where Arsenal can do one of two things if they really go for this signing is, yes, just go ahead, meet the release clause, get that deal done. Whatever the parameters of that release clause are and those conditions are, just meet those conditions. For example, if it is a case like it was with Matheus Cunha, 3 installments. So you pay one now, one next summer, and the summer after that. Or will Arsenal try and negotiate on that release clause with Crystal Palace? And I've mentioned this before, and some people have said, why would you want to pay more? Yes, you might offer Crystal Palace more money for Eberechi Eze over and above the release clause, but in return for favourable payment terms. Maybe Arsenal are trying to discuss that side of it. We're told that personal terms aren't expected to be a problem here. We're hearing some noises that Eberechi Eze would be open to that move. But he's definitely emerging now as a big target for Arsenal in this window.
Arsenal going to be strong, Sam. Eze, if they get him as well, and behind Gyokeres. And I said bad news for Havertz on the Gyokeres question. It's like, this not getting any better, is it?
No, and it's also potentially bad news for someone like Gabriel Martinelli, because I would have to guess that Arsenal are looking at Eze here as a left winger first and foremost. We spoke last week about he has a nice bit of versatility. You know, he can play as a number 10, he can play as a number 8 in a flatter midfield 3. So that could work. But surely if you're spending 60 to 70 million pounds on a player, you've got a pretty obvious role for him in mind, a first team role, a set role. Pop him in your system here. This is where he's going to do his business. If he has to play elsewhere, fine, but you need a proper plan for anyone that costs this much money. You don't just buy them and go, well, we'll see what happens. So this puts pressure on Martinelli in the same way that a new striker would put pressure on Havertz, which is exactly what Arsenal need. They're a very well-built team, but they don't really have a lot of risk-taking in their attacking setup. They don't have a player outside of Saka who's necessarily going to break the lines or take control of a game. And it's what I've been asking for, right, all summer. Give Saka a bit of help here. And I think Eze would do that. If he was 3 years younger, I say this a lot too, they probably already have signed him. But they're probably just weighing things up a little bit because Eze, it's kind of snuck up on me and it probably will to others, already 27 years of age. To me, he feels eternally 25. But these things matter in these negotiations when you're considering dropping this much money on a player.
You know what? Madueke as well as another one, Noni at Chelsea. I'm just going to throw this straight in off the back. Did they go for both or is it one or the other, Dharmesh? What are you hearing?
It's not just Noni Madueke that they're interested in. Rodrygo is one that has been floating about throughout this transfer window. You just wonder whether he's going to be the odd man out in that Real Madrid team under Xabi Alonso. The information I'm getting is it possibly could be Arsenal looking for 2 of those 3 to really strengthen that forward line, to really have competition. And as Sam alluded to there, to give the players like, in particular, Bukayo Saka, that rest that he probably needed before he got that hamstring injury last season. So it's looking like a really exciting window suddenly for Arsenal. I know Arsenal fans were panicking a bit at the start of this window, but it looks like they've got it all in hand because what had happened really at the start of this window, they saw the likes of Liverpool and Manchester City, their biggest rivals for the Premier League title, you'd have to argue, really going for it early in this transfer window. And it's a case of why aren't Arsenal doing anything? I think they just took a step back. At the time, there was still like 2.5 months left of this transfer window. The season had just finished. So let everyone just take a step back, just relax. So if you look at what they've done so far, Kepa in, Zubimendi in, Norgard on his way. That one looks as though it is as good as done. Gyokeres, that one is advancing. Mosquera, Christian Mosquera from Valencia, central defender. Gap in valuation at the moment. But again, the direction of travel would suggest that Arsenal want to get that one over the line. And then you've got maybe 1 or 2 of 3 from these. Eberechi Eze, Noni Madueke and Rodrygo. That's all going to depend on the profile of the player, of course, but also the finances that will be involved because Arsenal have gone big so far in this window.
All right, Sam, we're just picking up on that. What kind of player is Mosquera? Good fit for Arsenal?
Right, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a Mosquera expert, but I've seen a bit. He looks like a player who is worth investing in from a project perspective. He's very physical. He's very quick in recovery, so that's great. But it's weird. You look at his statistics, you look at his radar, and one thing really sticks out as not very Arsenal here is his aerial win duel percentage is atrocious. He's in the 6th percentile across Europe for the last year. Now, there's a reason people call Arsenal set piece FC, and it's because some of Arteta's non-negotiables here are that they are very physically dominant, very, very strong in duels, and very good in the air, right? Even the midfielders and strikers he buys are all massive. You know, his midfielders are Mikel Merino, and he buys Gyokeres up front. And so Mosquera, just from that one perspective there, it doesn't strike me as a very Arsenal player. But with a bit of coaching, that one sticking point there can come through, which leads me to believe that it is a long-term view. It is a project. It's, as people keep saying, a market opportunity. He's into the last year of his deal. Arsenal think they can work with him over the long term. And for 25 million, or maybe it'll come down a bit, maybe it's 20 million, that's a strike worth taking for sure. But if he were to sign for Arsenal, I am not totally convinced we would see him very much early doors. Saliba and Gabriel is a very difficult partnership to crack.
Thomas, but before we finish on Arsenal, you mentioned Zubimendi. What were the details of that one?
Yeah, done deal. And this has been a year in the making, actually. Pete, £51 million. They met that release clause. But this goes back to last summer. You remember Liverpool thought they had an agreement. Well, they did have an agreement with the player and the club. But Zubimendi decided, no, he didn't want to go in the end and stay on at Real Sociedad for another season. Now, I kind of alluded to this before in previous podcasts, but a lot of the details are now starting to come out. Last summer, Arsenal actually wanted to buy Mikel Merino and Martin Zubimendi in the same transfer window because they knew that Jorginho and Thomas Partey were coming into the last year of their contracts, and one, if not both, were likely to leave the football club. So they had to start forward planning ahead of those two departures. Now, Real Sociedad said, look, we can't sell both in this transfer window. We simply can't do that. So Arsenal came up with the solution. Okay, Mikel Merino 2024 and Martin Zubimendi in 2025. Now, it shouldn't be underestimated here the role that Mikel Arteta played, because he struck an instant connection with Martin Zubimendi, even though we've, since heard that Xabi Alonso is a hero of Martin Zubimendi. He was his favorite player when he was growing up. And this deal that Arsenal were working on that started last summer eventually got agreed in principle, subject to all the regulatory processes, back in March. And it's good it happened in March, because come June, that's when Real Madrid started to come knocking. But I think Arsenal were pretty relaxed and confident that everything that needed to be agreed in that deal had been agreed. Martin Zubimendi was going to become an Arsenal player. Another player who may deserve a bit of credit as well. We what do we call it? We call it secret agent, don't we? I think Mikel Merino might have been in the ear of Martin Zubimendi as well. They're very good friends. And he was basically eulogizing about the wonders of Arsenal to Martin Zubimendi, really encouraging him that this was going to be the place for him to continue his football. But I think it was the Mikel Arteta factor that was huge, because this is a player, and Sam talked about it before and he's talked about it previously, about these players who come from that region and how difficult it is for them to leave those football clubs and leave those regions. Well, it seems that Mikel Arteta put Zubimendi at complete ease and said, don't worry, this is the place for you. Come to the Premier League. I want you to come to Arsenal, and this is how I see you playing. So I think a year in the making, and I think this is a real coup, I think, for Arsenal. For £51 million as well, it could be one of the signings of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, Mikel Arteta and Mikel Merino clearly been in his ear, but probably Kieran Tierney too. Don't forget that Kieran Tierney spent a year on loan at Real Sociedad. The three of them, let's give equal credit out. Kieran Tierney surely as big a part of this as anyone.